Oh, wait, hold on. I gotta get my charger. My laptop's about to die. Hold on.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
Don't die, don't die, don't die, don't die.
Larry is going to get his laptop charger. Because it's going to die. He's plugging it in. And Larry is no longer in the meeting. Okay.
I wish that for only one day Dad couldn't tell a lie.
That was incredible. Was it good for you?
I've had better.
It's just like this explosive comedy that is just it is so ridiculous, so silly. But at the heart of it is a really beautiful message, I think. And it's all of these qualities, the funny, the endearing, everything about it, that just makes me feel so good.
Hi, I'm Taylor, and welcome back to the Film Nuts podcast. I feel like we've been living in uncertain times for a while now. It's hard to pinpoint when it all started. But now more than ever, we're gravitating toward stuff that just makes us feel good. Whether it's a book we've read before or a show that takes place in a universe we're familiar with, we're just looking for comfort. But comfort isn't always like passive complacency. Sometimes we're just feeling down about ourselves or our surroundings, and we just actively want a quick booster shot for our mood. And what better mood booster than laughter? 1997's Liar Liar was one of many vehicles for actor Jim Carrey's signature brand of over-the-top, slapstick, body-contorting comedy that provided so much joy to those of us who grew up with his films of that decade. The premise of a lawyer who, because of his son's birthday wish, literally cannot lie for 24 hours makes for a highly entertaining, goofy, and heartfelt film. And it proves to be that source of positivity for today's guest. Larry Freed is a filmmaker and podcaster whose show, My Favorite Movie Is, highlights the favorite films of people who make films and tell stories. It's a really insightful show, and I figured why not ask him about what one of his favorite movies might be. We talk about memorable moments from Liar Liar, Jim Carrey's acting style, and I try to get Larry to admit to things he's lied about on tape. Larry really did his homework for this episode, so let's get to it. Here's Larry Freed talking about Liar Liar on the Film Nuts podcast. What is the worst lie you've ever told?
Oh, jeez. What kind of a question is that, Taylor?
Hey, man. You picked the movie.
I don't even It's true. I should have. You didn't send me any pre-interview questions about lying, Taylor.
No, I didn't, because I didn't think of them until later.
I'm really excited to talk about this film today, actually. I have seen it twice this week.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Getting ready for this conversation. I'm really excited because I love this film so much. And I'm also excited to talk to you, dude. I'm excited to have a conversation.
You're a filmmaker, you're a podcaster. I feel like another full-time job you have is just watching things constantly. Like, because right now, like, Sundance is going on and you're watching all that stuff, and then you're watching stuff purely for enjoyment as well.
Yeah.
How do you balance all that, man?
I mean, to be fair, I went really light on Sundance this year. I normally
what is light?
Yeah, well, okay, I should preface this with the fact that, like, I am not like a press accredited person. Like, this isn't a job. I do it purely because I love film festivals and I love exposing myself to everything I can get my hands on. Mm-hmm. So last year I watched 15 films at Sundance, and
nice.
which is like 15 films over the course of, like, I'd like to think like 5 or 6 days, which is super intense and not whatsoever recommended. This year, I took things a lot lighter. I only watched 4 films this year for Sundance, half because back when the first Sundance was that I was a part of, basically the first Sundance I took part in was the first virtual edition. And this was right when I was starting a full-time position virtually. So like things were really light. I could kind of maneuver my way around watching a bunch of films, you know, during work hours because like things were really chill. Yeah. This year we're deep in it and we're really busy. So like I couldn't like just, you know, stop working for 3 hours and watch something. So this year I only watched like 4 films. I wish I could have seen more because there was so much cool stuff out there. A big way in which I watch things out of enjoyment is that there's always sort of something revolving around me watching it. There's like a context or a consequence. So like award season is huge for me. I always like to be involved in that conversation. And in order to be involved in that conversation, you got to watch the movies. Whenever a new sequel for something comes out, or when a new work from a director I like or have maybe never heard of comes out, I'm like, okay, you have to watch these previous films, get yourself in the mindset. And so you just like, you know, sometimes it's literally just like, okay, I'm going to watch this film on this day, and if I want to be prepared, I have to watch this, or that. And other times you got to have people to do it with. That to me is major. Yeah. I have a ton of friends where I'll be like, okay, we're watching this tomorrow, and they're like, all right, cool. Me and my friend Steven have this, Steven, who's the assistant director on my show and has been a guest on my show. We're doing this challenge this year where we're going to watch one movie a week that's 90 minutes or less. It could be like any movie, whatever, but like we've committed. It's like, okay, we're both in this together, one movie a week, 90 minutes or less. And that helps a lot just to have people to do things with. I think the same applies for when you go to see movies at like a theater or something. Right. It's like, if we're going to go see this, like we're committing together that we're going to go see this. And I'm very serious about my movie going, which like some of my friends are like, some of my friends still haven't really gotten the memo. But like when I like commit to a movie that we're seeing in a theater, that is like, mark that in your calendar, be prepared. Like we're not going to be late. I'm a trailers guy, or at least I was. I'm trying less to be now because they ruin it so much. But you know, it's like an experience. I live in New Jersey, and I very often go to New York to watch films that are like that get limited releases there first. And so a lot of it is like, we're committing to this day, we're gonna do it, and that's how you get it done.
Going back, rewind. Your podcast. My favorite movie is.
Yeah, I got a podcast. Huh?
You do. Look at that. So it's called My Favorite Movie Is. You've done one season.
That's right. We have one full season. Okay. 10 episodes up wherever you get your podcasts right now.
So what inspired you to start a podcast?
For years, people were telling me that I have the voice for it, which
I don't see it.
No, I don't. To be honest, I don't really either. Sometimes I think that like my voice sounds different to me than to everybody else, but nope, it sounds the same. And I did a lot of commercials and radio stuff for my high school. And I'd always thought about doing a podcast for a while, but just thought like, I don't know what I add. Like, what can I add to this conversation? You know, I didn't really know. And then I just started thinking like, my favorite thing is to hear other people talk about their favorite movies, like people who I admire and people who I respect. One of my favorite things is when you're watching like press interviews for celebrities, you know, they're covering some other film, but suddenly they start talking about this other film that they love, and they just like, they're so like, they're geeking out about it, and they're like, it's like you can see it on their face. And I was like, we need like a podcast like that. We need a podcast for people to come on and talk about movies other than the ones that they're making, or things, or other than like anything that they're involved in, because I feel like it's just really exciting, and I feel like it can really tap into who that person is, why they're doing this, who are they, and those were all questions I was really interested in exploring. And then eventually, as I continued to develop the show, I realized that this can be great for filmmakers and storytellers, like, because through how they experience their favorite movie, what can we learn from that? Like, there's always something to glean from those conversations. And something in season 2 that we're really working on is having those conversations, is really thinking about what are those lessons that we can take away from it. And because I think deep down, every filmmaker wants to make somebody's next favorite movie. I think that everybody would consider that a pretty solid goal. And the only way we can, and like, you know, film school and all those places, they can teach you how to make a great movie. But my podcast is really about figuring out how can you make someone's next favorite movie? What are those mindsets and techniques that go into really understanding those personal impacts and connections? And so that's really what the show is about. And I'm really excited for season 2 because we've already been having some great conversations, and it's also helped me a lot too, inspiring me creatively and my work. And I'm really excited to, you know, continue recording episodes and you know, learning more and more from just the incredible artists and people that we have on our show.
Excellent. Great to hear, man.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. Liar, Liar. This is not a movie I would have thought anybody on this show would pick as a movie that has like affected them, inspired them, meant a lot to them. So, Larry Freed, please tell me how and why Liar, Liar is important to you.
Yeah, I guess the answer isn't really that deep. I mean, this is my number one comfort film, I guess, is the short answer. And I don't really normally engage with like comfort films and stuff like that, because sometimes I feel like that means that people just, you know, put something on in the background and that's like my comfort film. Like, you know, that it's so comforting for them that they just like to have it on in the background or something, and while they're doing other things. I don't really engage with film that way. I really struggle to do that. Like, I always feel like I need to be like watching it, because I'll fail to be able to engage with two different things at once in that way.
Yeah.
But I do engage with comfort films in the way that they just make your day better. They're like, this is a film that I constantly go to when I'm, you know, feeling sad or depressed or hurt, or especially when I'm like kind of reaching this like low point, this like depression malaise, as I like to call it, the sort of like, I have no motivation. I don't want to get anything done. I'm thinking about all of these tumultuous things going on in my life. And like, I'm starting to think, oh, is any of this stuff worth it? Why do I even bother? You know, all that nihilistic, wonderful stuff that I'm sure many artistic and creative people can relate to. And especially those of you who spend a lot of time on the internet. And so anytime I find myself in that position, I go back to this film because it's just the funniest. Am I allowed to curse? Are we good with cursing on the show? Yeah, this is the funniest fucking movie ever, dude. It is hilarious from top to bottom.
You know why I pulled you over?
Depends on how long you were following me.
Why don't we just take it from the top?
Here goes. I sped. I followed too closely. I ran a stop sign. I almost hit a Chevy. I sped some more. I failed to yield at a crosswalk. I changed lanes in the intersection. I changed lanes without signaling while running a red light and speeding.
Is that all?
No. I have unpaid parking tickets. Be gentle.
I mean, there's a lot of personal history as to why, why I feel that way, how much I love Jim Carrey, and why this film is just really personally meaningful to me. But it's like, even now, I feel like even today, it's just like this explosive comedy that is just it is so ridiculous, so silly. But at the heart of it is a really beautiful message, I think. And it's all of these qualities, the funny, the endearing, everything about it, that just makes me feel so good. It's the kind of movie that puts me in laughing fits. Like I can't, my brain doesn't have the space to remember all that other shit I was dealing with before, because all I'm thinking about is this movie. Just like nonstop laughter and jokes and comedic brilliance and heartwarming family stuff. And it's just every time I finish watching it, I feel like I can get back to what I was doing, or like I've been rejuvenated or revived. And so that's really why it's important to me. I mean, I do think that there are a lot of technical things about it that are incredibly impressive, especially since in lieu of this conversation, I've been like doing a little bit of research into the production behind it, and there's a lot of great filmmaking going on here for sure. But I certainly would understand that people would not watch Liar Liar and put it in the grand canon of, you know, excellent cinema or whatever, you know. And this is coming from somebody who loves cinema. Like I at times can get very heady and very pretentious, and like, you know, think about films in a very specific, meaningful to me way. But it's important to remember that, like, you know, you don't always have to be that way. You can have favorite films that don't necessarily reach this peak of technical excellence. You know, you can have films that just mean a lot to you personally and just make you feel good. And like, you can't help that. You can't help if a movie makes you feel great, so great that it just will completely alter you in a way. And so that's why I love this film. And when you asked me about films I wanted to talk about, it's kind of a weird conflict of interest because we both have podcasts about people's favorite movies. And on my show, I sometimes do solo episodes where I talk about my favorite movies. And so I couldn't come on here and talk about my favorite movies because, you know, I don't want to give up all my material.
I'm getting the table scraps, apparently.
Yeah. Okay, you say that, but Liar Liar is like top 5, dude. So like, you should be lucky. Consider yourself lucky. This is the first time I'm talking about Liar Liar on like a public forum on a podcast. So like,
I am honored. I am honored and humbled.
First, Mr. Reed, I see where your client...
Your Honor, I would like a continuance.
This case has already been delayed several times, Mr. Reed.
I realize that, Your Honor, but I would really like a continuance.
I'll have to hear good cause, Counsel. What's the problem?
I can't lie!
What do you remember, if anything, about the first time you saw this movie?
So I can't pinpoint an exact year or age or something like that, but I was thinking about it, and the only thing I can remember is that, so when I was a kid, my parents didn't have one of those like typical cable packages with like Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network and like all of those basic kid channels. I would be, you know, I had PBS, but like, you know, after a while, it's like, how many great shows can PBS Kids provide you? That's not true. They have a lot of great stuff. But
I was like, hold on.
Yeah. Look, we stand Cyber Chase. Okay. That's all I'm saying. But I would be watching a lot of adult networks because that was just what we had. So like, I was like, you know, over the day watching things on Fox and, you know, TNT and TBS and like all of these more adult oriented channels. And TBS especially was one that I watched a lot. And I know that they would host a number of like Jim Carrey film marathons like on TBS. They would air a lot of Jim Carrey's 90s output because I think it was just really good for their target audience. And so that's how I mean, I can't say for sure, but that's how I would like to believe that I discovered Jim Carrey and all of his films, you know, Liar Liar, Ace Ventura 1 and 2, Dumb and Dumber, The Mask, which is another one of my all-time favorite films. And then eventually, of course, you know, The Truman Show and some of his more dramatic output moving forward. But I probably watched Liar Liar on TV or something, and it just was something I really enjoyed watching. And it's one of those films for me that like I can't. I've seen it so many times and it feels so lodged into my membrane that like I can't pinpoint one specific first time. It's always been there, I guess, in a weird way. I guess that's a very cliche and a weird way to put it, but it does feel like it has always been there.
Right. Have you ever gotten a chance though to introduce it to someone for the first time? Like one of your friends or something like that? Or a family member?
Oh, that's a good one. I definitely have. I feel like I've definitely watched it with people for the first time. One of my friends who I actually just recently rewatched it with, she insists that the first time she watched it was with me, which I totally buy it. But I do not have a visceral experience. I can't think of a visceral experience where I've introduced it to somebody for the first time, but I know that me and my, again, a friend I mentioned earlier, me and my friend Steven, assistant director on my show and someone I've had as a guest on my show. We love the film, and we've shared the film a few times. And yeah, I've definitely shown it to a few friends. It's a bit of a struggle because Jim Carrey films are just so particular in their style of comedy, and I have showed other people other Jim Carrey films to like get in with the, like see what I love about these movies, and like that's one of the reasons why like Liar Liar has slowly crept up over The Mask as like my all-time favorite Jim Carrey film, because when you're watching The Mask with somebody for the first time in 2022, it's just like not everything lands, as well as it did back then. And I feel like Liar Liar just lands a little bit better. It's a little bit easier to get into. But that's the issue with sharing Jim Carrey films with other people. Unless it's their bag, there's a huge risk that like they're not going to love it and you're going to feel bad because you're watching it with someone who's not loving it the same way that you are. And it's going to like, you have the risk of like deflating your favorite films by doing that. Which, is that's kind of, the struggle with sharing your favorite things with other people that you hold on such a high pedestal.
Right.
But then I watched it by myself before this conversation, and I was like, no, yeah, this is there. This is up there. This is really high up there.
What about Jim Carrey makes him so interesting to watch?
I was thinking about this when I noticed this. Basically, to give some context, earlier in the week that we're recording this, I was sort of falling into one of those depressive malaises that I spoke about earlier. And I knew I had to watch this film. It was like, all right, it's time. And so I texted a friend of mine, and I'm like, hey, I need to come over. Like, today has been just such garbage, but we need to watch Liar Liar. And she's like, okay. And so I came over and we watched it, and I loved it, of course. But as I was watching it, I noticed so many details about Jim Carrey's performance that is just, they are just so overlooked. I think it's pretty easy. This is a very cold take, but Jim Carrey is just a brilliant comedian. I think that I'm not the first person to analyze and understand, why Jim Carrey is so talented. I think it's pretty clear at the onset. But I think that what a lot of people remember Jim Carrey for are like the big moments, like somebody stop me, like from The Mask, or like from Liar Liar, like, the pen is blue, like everybody remembers those like massive iconic moments. But what people aren't as dialed into, at least not in his 90s output, maybe in his earlier stuff like In Living Color, people were a little bit more attuned to this. But like, you just need to like watch him. Like, his body is like a full-on comedic toolbox. You like every single line delivery in this movie, every single movement, everything that he does, whether comedic or not, every single part of his body is like being used in a very specific way. Just watch his eyes, his mouth, his face, and his neck, how he rotates his head with his neck. The amount he'll widen his eyes and mouth, like depending on the reaction. Of course, his arms and his legs, how he moves them around, and just like everything about his body is being used as this instrument for comedy. And I love watching it. I love seeing how in just one scene you see the fluctuations of how everything is being used differently. I think this is just so subtle, but like I think of in the very beginning of the film when he's running out of the courthouse.
Hey, Fletcher, how'd it go there?
Just another victory for the wrongly accused.
Yeah, right.
Mr. Reed, great job. Say, do you want your coat back?
No, I'm sure you'll be needing it again and again.
Mr. Reed, do you have a moment?
I'm sorry, I'm very late. It's my day to be with my son.
A couple of reporters want to talk to you about your big win today.
Oh, yeah? How's my hair?
Fabulous. You look great.
And then he like kind of rotates his head and like moves his hand up on his hair. It's like, how's my hair? And I'm like, it's just that little microcosm of his performance. The way he cocks his head, the way he pats his hair, the way he looks at her with like this kind of like, oh, like it's a moment for me to shine again. It's like there's a physicality to him that everybody knows about Jim Carrey's physicality, but it's not just these huge, gigantic fights when he literally, I'm kicking my ass. Do you mind? Like there's obviously all of that, and that's brilliant. But even the small things, the small moments, everything that punctuates every single comedic beat. And I was listening to some interviews and a director's commentary on the film, and apparently Jim Carrey would get 15 or 20 takes of singular interactions, singular comedic beats in a film. And it just shows, because every single beat has a beat, for lack of a better word. It has a moment. It has clear thought put into, how does my hair look? What are my hands doing? What is my face doing? There's every single part of the performance is just immaculate and perfection.
Hey folks, thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Film Nuts podcast. Real quickly before we get back to the action, if you're enjoying this episode or enjoying any of our episodes, let me tell you how you can support us. It's super easy. All you got to do is subscribe to stay up to date with all the episodes we have. And if you're listening specifically on Apple Podcasts, leave a rating and review. That'll help us be seen or heard by more awesome people like yourself. Okay, enough of the promo stuff. Let's get back to the show.
I feel like for other films like Dumb and Dumber and Ace Ventura and The Mask, there's a lot that's kind of helping Jim Carrey. I mean, especially in The Mask, the movie looks, there's the line speaks for itself. I mean, the movie looks for itself. I mean, as soon as Jim Carrey dons that mask, the comedy writes itself. And admittedly, Jim Carrey acting and being just as expressive, through all that makeup and prosthetic work is incredible. But those movies have so much visually that help to aid the comedy a lot. And Liar Liar is a fairly simple looking 90s comedy. There isn't a lot, obviously there's some really great filmmaking in terms of a technical, in terms of just the basic filmmaking, the formal stuff. But in terms of technicality, there really isn't a lot there. It's much more pulled back. It's a lot more straightforward. So this is just a perfect, it's a perfect avenue for Jim Carrey to just fully let himself go. It's just him. All he's got is a suit and his combed back hair, and this is the most conventional he's looked in any movie. So that, if anything, you would think would make it harder, but Jim Carrey knew he had to just go even further with it and really push himself. It might be honestly the most intense he gets in any of his films, and rightfully so, because he needs to he needs to compensate for the fact that the movie is much more simple and straightforward than his other films. And I love Jim Carrey. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I was exposed to him to a very young age. He was one of the first actors who I just knew he was an actor. When I was first learning what actors were, Jim Carrey was there. He just was a face that I knew for years. And recently I wrote a piece about Jim Carrey and his life, and sort of how his films have really lined up with a lot of his sort of spiritual journey. And I was just running back through all of his films, and he's just a complete genius, a marvel of comedy. And Liar Liar to me represents his talents and his ability at just the utmost levels, firing on all cylinders. And as somebody who really admires comedy from afar, I don't think I'm a really great comedy writer or director, but I really appreciate comedy. And just watching him do everything that he does, it's just an absolute inspiration. And to me, it's an example of just how comedic acting can be storytelling just as much as anything else.
So you were saying how the aesthetic of this movie, the aesthetic of Liar Liar, it's very bland. So it allows Jim Carrey to kind of do his thing unencumbered by whatever else might need to go on with the movie, as opposed to The Mask, like you mentioned. And while we know that Jim Carrey, through kind of the later middle of his career, started doing more dramatic stuff, going back to the comedy for a second, can you think of a dramatic, hand in the air, dramatic in italics, dramatic actor who is kind of the same as Jim Carrey? They get parts in movies where it's just kind of aesthetically bland, very straightforward, not in a bad way, but that allows that actor to be an actor?
That's tough. I don't think anybody gets as physical as Jim Carrey does.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think he really has much of an equal in that regard. But I do think that era in which the film came out in, you know, the sort of the 90s, just general as a decade, was sort of a heyday for films very much like Liar Liar, which were very simple. I mean, again, you said bland. I wouldn't necessarily go on to call it bland, but I would go on to call it simple. Like it is very.
I say bland in comparison to other his stuff, but yeah, more along the straightforward. I mean, to be fair, I mean there are certainly some shots that I'm like, you probably could have done a little bit more with that. But like, you know, Tom Shadyac is not, you know, Francis Ford Coppola, you know, so I'm not expecting, you know, auteurism, but that was just sort of an era in which, you know, all these comedians, you know, who were previously stand-ups, who were becoming these like movie icons. You know, we're talking about like Robin Williams is probably the next best you know, comedian to talk about in this same caliber. You have Eddie Murphy, Adam Sandler is another big one. These comedians who were like, and granted, Eddie Murphy was also really big in the 80s, and you had some other people like Bill Murray and other comedians like that. Comedies in the 80s and 90s were just so different because they were allowed to be relatively straightforward and not really have this high level of technical artistry behind them. But that allowed the comedians at the center of them to just totally own them. Like, I mean, when I think of Liar Liar, a few other really good films that I think about are like Mrs. Doubtfire, for example, is I think a great, it would make a great double feature with Liar Liar, because that is Robin Williams fully giving himself to a movie that is, again, relatively straightforward and also has a lot of dramatic elements to it. You know, they're both movies about families, you know, sort of reconciling divorce and what that looks like for the family as a whole, and fathers especially having to deal with that. And they both sort of own that movie because they're both allowed to just sort of bring so much of themselves to it. I also think of something like Groundhog Day, even though it's like a little bit more trickle down 80s because it was released in 1990. But that's, I mean, that movie, again, it's also pretty straightforward, but that's just Bill Murray owning it. Everybody remembers Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. And all of these films kind of have a very simple conceit. You know, they're not these epic dramas. You know, it's like, you know, Liar Liar, a lawyer has to tell the truth for 24 hours. Oh, that could be funny. You know, Groundhog Day, this arrogant news reporter gets caught in a time loop on Groundhog Day. Oh, that could kind of be funny. Oh, this divorcee needs to become a nanny to spend time with his kids. Like, okay, that could be funny. Like all these very basic concepts that are very straightforward in terms of the filmmaking themselves, but the comedian at the center just completely owns it. And I would say Liar Liar is sort of at the peak of that mountain. And there are a couple of films like that just all across the 90s. You know, something like a Billy Madison too, I think would fit pretty well in there. And that's how all these comedians kind of shaped their careers, was because they were the center, the core of these relatively straightforward movies. Honestly, now that I think about it, The Wedding Singer is probably one that I would say is better than Billy Madison, because that just was like that the same kind of funny conceit, you know, fits with Wedding Singer a lot. And I love The Wedding Singer. That's probably my favorite Adam Sandler film. But yeah, like they were, the comedians were kind of given, they were so powerful. The comedians were so powerful, and they were so, people knew that they were making money with them in it. So they were like, what do you want to do? What do you want to bring? You know, and they just ran with that, and they had so much free range. And, you know, I feel like that's not something that you see a lot. Not to sound too much like, oh, they don't make them like they used to, but, you know, they really would never make a film like Liar Liar today. Yeah. So you've already quoted multiple things from this movie, but what is your favorite scene from Liar Liar?
Oh, I haven't thought about that. Was the one. Oh man, I forgot to think about that question. Oh, that's really hard. You know, I guess my favorite scene in the movie isn't actually a comedic scene. It's actually what I consider to be like the the dramatic crux of the film. The scene that, in my opinion, gives the film the weight that I think people don't really give it credit for. It's the scene in which Fletcher is sitting down with his son. He goes to see his son at school because he's just learned that his son made the wish that is causing him to say the truth.
Did it work?
Not like I'd hoped. Did you unwish it?
Only...
What? Only what?
Yesterday when I wished it, I really meant it. This time when I unwished it, I only did it because you told me to.
All right. Then do it again, and this time, mean it.
But I can't.
Why not?
Because I don't want you to lie.
I explained this. I have to lie. Everybody lies. Mommy lies. Even the wonderful Jerry lies.
But you're the only one that makes me feel bad.
I think it's a brilliant sort of understanding of the problems with the character, of like what is the character's flaw. You know, we talk a lot about in writing. We have to understand what the character's flaws are, and admittedly, the scene comes pretty late. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of thought to understand what the flaws of this character might be, but that scene just packages it for you nice and good, and it gives you a line that just perfectly encapsulates everything. And it's that perfect line where all the audience members are like, oh, you know, like oh, it's like this dramatic moment. But that's the whole point. That's why it's great. It's because it channels into everybody's emotional sincerity, but at the same time, I mean, first of all, warranting that kind of moment is like very hard, at least for someone like me who has a heart of steel. But like, those moments are often so trite and so boring, but this movie earns it because it wraps that moment in the present of this is the problem. This is the central emotional relationship of the film, and this is the problem with that relationship. Like, there's nothing wrong with lying, hypothetically, which is sort of part of the theme of the film. I like to think is like, what is lying? Why do we lie? And when is lying bad? Because, you know, the wife character in the film is sort of lying to herself in a sort of way with her relationship with the stepfather, Jerry. Or not the stepfather, but the boyfriend, Jerry. You know, she is sort of using him to make herself believe that she doesn't, you know, that she doesn't love Fletcher anymore, that she doesn't care about Fletcher. And that to me is like a great example of like you know, one of the many like sort of sub themes running through this movie about like people lying to themselves, people lying to other people. You know, like lying is something that we always do, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Lying isn't this inherently evil thing, and so that scene kind of gets to the jump of why that is, but it gets to the point of why lying can be bad. And it's when you hurt people. It's when you hurt the people you love through doing it. And that's really at the heart of what this film is all about. And when I talk to people about this movie, I'm always talking about that scene, because to me, that scene is just such a great encapsulation of why I love this movie and why I think this movie deserves to be talked about more, outside of the fact that it's just the funniest fucking movie ever.
Did you lie a lot as a kid?
I don't know if I mean I definitely did a little bit. I would often lie to my parents about brushing my teeth, which definitely bit me in the ass later in life. But I definitely, I will admit, I occasionally will sort of spin. You know, I guess I will definitely not tell people some things. You know, like lie by omission is a good way to put it, but like sometimes I will like not tell people things. Yeah. If I know that it will hurt them, like unnecessarily hurt them. And I guess a reason I really love this movie is that, you know, I sometimes will lie to people in order to not hurt them. And I think this movie taught me that you can do that without hurting people. Like, it really made me think about what is lying, you know, like lying. If you're lying about something to save your ass from somebody when you know you're culpable of something, that's very different than when, you know, you have a friend who got dumped by another friend of yours, and they're texting you like, "Oh, what's he doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, he's pissing himself, miserable." I'm not going to tell him that he maybe is going, he's seeing someone new and is having a perfectly decent life, but like, you don't need to tell them that. You don't need to hurt people if you feel like it's not going to benefit them in a way that will be self-reflexive or something. And I don't think the film is necessarily about lying in that sense, but the film is about just what is lying in general. Like, why do we lie? I mean, the whole emotional, climactic, dramatic moment in the courtroom.
Now, let me get this straight. That would mean that you lied about your age to make yourself older. But why would any woman want to do that?
I changed it so I could get married.
And the truth shall set you free. My client lied about her age. She was only 17 when she got married, which makes her a minor. And in the great state of California, no minor can enter into any legal contract without parental consent, including
Prenuptial agreement.
Prenuptial agreements! This contract is void. The fact that my client has been ridden more than Seattle Slew is irrelevant. Standard community property applies, and she is entitled to half of the marital assets, or $11.395 million. Jordan fades back, swoosh, and that's the game!
I'm always for breaking down conventions and really understanding the things that we learned from our parents or from our school teachers that maybe within a new age context could probably be reinterpreted. And there's maybe a middle ground that we didn't understand. And I think with lying is a very similar thing.
Right.
And this movie showcases that in a really fun and exciting way.
Did you ever have that kind of did you ever feel a consequence for a lie you told and then felt bad about it in that moment?
Oh, I mean, I definitely have in the past. One time I was in a group chat with a bunch of my friends, and there was like a fight basically that happened between some of the people in the chat, and one of the people left the chat. Mm-hmm. And then we basically just started roasting that person who left the chat because fuck them, whatever, the stages of grief,
right,
as it were. And like I think one of the comments was like, we all really didn't like her partner at the time, this person, and someone made a very disparaging comment about their partner. And then one of my friends, who's sort of the peacemaker of the group, invited the person back in and was like, oh, let's try to make peace about this, blah, blah, blah. But one of my other friends, who was kind of catching up on the situation, thumbs up one of the iMessage comments from when that person was out of the chat. So people who don't understand this, that iPhones have this message reaction feature where you can react to messages like with thumbs up or haha or something that you send like when you text. And when they do that, everybody gets a notification about the message that was liked or laughed about, even if it was even when you were not in the chat when that message was there. And so they saw that someone had liked a message disparaging her partner.
Yeah.
And she was like, all right, who the fuck did that? And she was beginning to message us individually, like, okay, fucking come on, tell me. Yeah. I'm like, no, I'm not going to tell you. Like, why would I tell you that?
Snitches get stitches.
Yeah, snitches get exactly. And we didn't talk for a while after that. Like, wow. Thankfully we're still friends. We're very good friends now, but like we didn't talk for a while, like upwards of like maybe a year or 2 years.
Oh shit.
And yeah, and it was like that is definitely a consequence in the sense of sometimes you know who it is, but you're going to lie to them just because you don't want to hurt them.
So describe how you would recommend this movie to other people.
I would recommend this to people if you're a fan of that era of comedies as well. 90s comedies that are just a central fun comedian just owning it. Again, a lot of the films I talked about, Groundhog Day, Mrs. Doubtfire, Wedding Singer, I feel like they all kind of go hand in hand with Liar Liar. And if you like slapstick and you want to have a good time, I mean, this is like slapstick mania. I feel like anybody who likes slapstick, this is the movie for you, because it's just physical comedy after physical comedy. And even the small things, like I think about the moment where they're at the car impound and the impound lot.
Thank you. I can't tell you how much this means to me.
I can. $1,654.11.
How do you sleep at night? I'm taking this.
Small bits like that have just as much comedic and physical value as any of the other bits. God, the amount of times that Jim Carrey like falls on the floor or like jumps or like dances, like it's anybody who enjoys physical comedy needs to watch this as well. And anybody who's just in for a good time. If you want a good time, if you want a feel-good movie that also has a lot of heart, this is a great film. Just like be ready for intense physicality. Yeah, man. The blooper reel is also so great. It's one of the best blooper reels. And there's more outtakes on the Blu-ray too, which is just fantastic. You just think about like, it's funny to think about that, like, you know, you'll see the take they chose for the film and they had 10 takes that were crazier than that one. Like there's no bar.
Yeah.
The bar is always raised.
Yeah.
Which is just a testament to his talent.
The Mask is my favorite. And this is definitely
that was my favorite for a long time.
Yeah, this is definitely in that era of 90s Jim Carrey that a lot of us who growing up 90s Jim Carrey is like synonymous with people kind of finding out what funny is. Because there's a lot of comedy in it. There's a lot of slapstick. There's over the top performances. I've heard someone say he's a living cartoon, which is probably
100%.
a very accurate description. But
I want to say another one of my personal favorite, two of my favorite moments is whenever he runs into Miranda's character. The first time it's like he's waiting for the elevator and she's like, "Oh, hi, Fletcher." He goes, "Holy hell!" And he's like, that part
every
always
time
ruins me.
Yeah.
And then when she runs into him right outside of the conference room.
Goodbye, Mr. Reed.
No, wait, I didn't understand the question. Ask me again.
Have a nice day in court.
Greta! God in heaven!
It's nice to see you too, Fletcher. Are you busy?
Extremely.
Good. Would you follow me, please?
I was listening to the commentary track by Tom Shadyac, and the director of the film, and he said like they decided to make the truth kind of like this Tourette's syndrome, which like in 2022, not the most PC thing to say, but that was how they designed it, and that it was just coming out of him. It wasn't like it's not like other times they've tried this conceit before, where it's just like he can't lie, so like he can like stop himself from talking if he doesn't want to lie, you know, like to like fight against it. No, it's coming out of him. Like he cannot stop it, and even when he doesn't want to say anything, he will answer it 100% truthfully.
But things just keep coming up at the last minute, right?
Yes, but this time it's different.
I see. And how is that?
Now I'm telling the truth.
And last night you weren't.
No.
Well, what were you doing?
Having sex.
Well, I hope that it was with someone very special.
No, see, that's the thing. I don't even like her, but she's a partner, and I thought I could help my career by making her squeal.
Ugh.
What's wrong with me? I'm getting what I deserve. I'm reaping what I sow.
It's like there's a stream coming out of his mouth that he cannot contain within himself. And I just think that's a very subtle comedic choice. It doesn't seem subtle when you're watching it, but in terms of the comedic, the thought process behind the comedy, that's an incredibly smart choice. And it's what leads to him having to fight like the blue pen, like all of these manifestations of him, of the lie, of the lying, because it gives the character a conflict within the entire story in a very kind of weird and subtle roundabout way. And I think it just also goes to show that like this guy is like an absolute man-child. And by forcing him to be at the very end of his wits, at the end of his rope, you see him at his absolute lowest points, which are just this horrible, crude, mean man-child person. Which a lot of people don't think about because they just think Jim Carrey is being funny, but like no, like this is him at the very lowest point. And a lot of times we talk about in writing, we want to get the character to his lowest point, at some point, so that way he can have the motivation to get back up. And that's what happens in this movie 100% all the way through. And I just think that people need to appreciate that more, because I think it's just a genius, and very clever and unique execution of an idea that we've seen a couple of times in films. But it's completely untouched.
I think my favorite scene is probably the blue pen scene. Just because like
iconic.
there's moments of the movie where like there is an element of fantasy in this movie, because this wish isn't a thing. Like, like that's not a real thing that happens. So the wish coming true this is basically a fantasy movie. And then
very light. Yeah.
And then when you get to the part with the pen, and he's literally like, his mind and body are fighting each other. And this is even before the bathroom scene where he's like, the pen in his hand is fighting himself.
All right, now focus. The color of this pen is the color of this pen is the color of the pen that I hold in my hand is royal blue. One lie and I can't say it.
I can just imagine the crew on set during that, like trying to contain their laughter for something as silly as this was. Because I can see like the bathroom scene is like he's beating himself up and it's funny, but I think the pen scene's funnier because there's so much restraint. Like there's so much aggression that's being restrained in it, I think is why I like that scene so much.
Oh, definitely. Apparently he like was bruising his arm a lot. He bruised his arm a ton after shooting that. They shot that moment over the course of a whole day, which was crazy. And I do love the pen is blue. It's one of the most iconic lines of all time. I tried to make that my Wi-Fi password at one point, except I realized that without spaces, that just looks like the penis blue.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you could still do that. Well, man, this was awesome. This was great.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me on.
Of course.
I loved being here.
You guys know that saying, laughter is the best medicine? Well, it might not be literal, but hell if it isn't a definite source of joy for when you're feeling blue. And as you can tell, it certainly brings a smile to Larry's face whenever he watches or talks about this movie. You should go listen to his podcast, My Favorite Movie Is. Check out the show notes for the link. A huge thank you to Larry for joining me today, and an even bigger thank you to you for listening. This season's theme is brought to us by theDeeepEnd. If y'all have any questions or want to reach out, you can check us out on Twitter at FilmNutsPodcast or email hello@filmnutspodcast.com. Please don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with all of our episodes. And go ahead and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts to let us know how we're doing. Thanks again so much for listening. And until next time, here's hoping all of your birthday wishes come true for hopefully more than 24 hours.